Well, Nancy Pelosi's potential visit to Taiwan is threatening to cast a shadow on a series of high-level meetings in Phnom Penh. ASEAN chair Cambodia is hosting the bloc's foreign ministers meeting as well as the East Asia summit. Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi is set to attend alongside U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Leong Wai-kit joins us from Phnom Penh with more on this. Wai-kit, could the Ms. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, much anticipated as it is, shift the focus of the ASEAN talks in Cambodia?
Well, Jill, it looks to be that way, at least among hundreds of reporters from foreign outlets as well as domestic agencies gathered here in Phnom Penh. This is a hot topic among journalists here. In fact, earlier during a media event hosted by Cambodia, the question of Taiwan Straits was asked. Cambodia says it's concerned over the rising tensions there and calls for the escalation of the situation. Earlier, in fact, while I was standing by to go live on CNA, Indonesia's Retno Marsudi walked past. I rushed over, asked a few questions, including her views on Taiwan Straits. She had very politely sidestepped that question. And understandably so, perhaps, because ASEAN is put in a very difficult situation because ASEAN will not want to be forced to choose sides. Experts also say that when it comes to China-Taiwan issues, ASEAN would not want to be involved. Now, earlier, Jill, you mentioned that China's Wang Yi will be in Phnom Penh, but he will not be meeting his counterpart, Antony Blinken, which means all eyes will be on the East Asia Summit slated to take place later on this week. Now, last year, China accused Washington of using East Asia Summit as a platform to attack Beijing. It said that US had raised irresponsible remarks, including the human rights situations in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. Experts say, however, this year, the East Asia Summit could likely also be a platform for China to reaffirm its narrative against US. They're likely to paint US as an aggressor, as someone who wants to meddle in the region's affairs. Now, I'm also keeping a very close watch on a joint communique that could be issued at the end of the week. That's basically a document that details meeting points endorsed by ASEAN foreign ministers attending the meeting. Now, it would be very interesting to see whether or not there'll be a paragraph that talks about US engagement in this region as well as Taiwan Straits. It will also be interesting to see how that is being worded, because that gives us a sense of how Cambodia, as ASEAN chair, may have control over pushing out this statement. Now, in the long run, what this means for ASEAN is that it will have to take very careful steps to navigate this geopolitical environment, which seems to be more volatile and complex.
Well, even on issues closer to home in the Asian region itself, they're still grappling with a few issues there, particularly whether they will take a stronger stance on Myanmar's military during those talks.
Well, that's right, Jill. And based on what we know, Malaysia, as we know, is very vocal about this issue. We know that Malaysia is likely to want to go to the negotiating table to push for a stronger stance by ASEAN, detailing a more detailed plan to lead to what Malaysia describes as an end game for Myanmar, which in his view is a democratic, inclusive and peaceful country that respects the rights of parties, political parties and individuals. Now, whether or not this makes headway during this week's ASEAN meeting really remains to be seen, because there are so many other more pressing issues or as important let me start that all over again. I was distracted by photographers. Whether or not this will make any headway during this week's ASEAN meeting remains to be seen, because there's so many issues that will vie for the attention of these ASEAN foreign ministers.
It's okay. We got your points loud and clear. Many thanks, Leong Wai-kit, reporting there from Phnom Penh.
For more on Nancy Pelosi's possible Taiwan visit, Drew Thompson, visiting senior research fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, joins us live now. Drew, high expectations that Nancy Pelosi will, in fact, arrive in Taiwan at some point, despite Beijing's series of threats in the past few days. It's reported she may well meet up with a small group of activists in Taipei as well, who are outspoken about China's human rights record. Now, we know she's had an unwavering defense of human rights and democratic values abroad. But does this trip risk worsening US-China ties at this stage?
Well, I think Speaker Pelosi is definitely taking a very calculated risk. And she's placed greater value on the necessity of reassuring Taiwan of US support over the risk of China's response. And that includes the importance of demonstrating those US and Taiwan shared values like human rights, like the rule of law, like transparency. And I think importantly, this wasn't an uninformed decision. The decision was made and very much informed by the more than 2-hour phone call between President Biden and Xi Jinping last week, where Xi Jinping delivered very authoritative messages about his concerns. And the calculation was that this would not result in a conflict or a set of consequences that were not worth the risk and the accomplishments that they'd otherwise make on the trip.
Well, she's certainly drawing a great deal of attention from both sides of the aisle because of this potential trip. I mean, some calling it reckless, others calling it brave. But the posture that she has taken has often drawn this criticism, but it has also put her at odds. What can she actually achieve, though, with such a visit, Drew?
Well, one important element that you alluded to is that there is very strong bipartisan support for Taiwan in Washington, and that's both in Congress and in the White House. The U.S. approach to Taiwan has been pretty consistent since 1979 and the switch of recognition. So I think that element of strong support for Taiwan really also motivates her. But I think the big accomplishments is really about establishing and shoring up U.S. credibility, demonstrating American willingness to stand up to China and support its allies and partners in the region. And that's more than just Taiwan. I mean, this is a clear signal to other U.S. allies and partners in the region that the U.S. is a good partner and that the U.S. will stand up on behalf of its partners and show up. And I think that's a really important signal that she's trying to send. And I think when she arrives and she has these meetings, she will demonstrate that. And she'll also send that clear signal. I believe she may also visit one of the human rights museums in Taiwan, as well as meeting with opposition party members. So she'll meet with the KMT as well as with President Tsai, demonstrating U.S. support for multi-party democracy.
And Drew, in the lead up to this visit, China has issued many threats against it. What are the chances, though, of any military escalation?
So one thing to keep in mind is there's lots of voices, and some voices are authoritative and some are not. And as I mentioned, the discussion between Xi Jinping and President Biden was authoritative. And the White House pointed out that Xi Jinping used many of the same phrases that he used in November 2021 when they had their previous call. So I think the White House was reassured, and that's one of the reasons that Taiwan was not listed in the countries that President Tsai was Speaker Pelosi would be visiting. So they're sustaining that U.S.-China-Taiwan approach of unofficial relations with Taiwan. But I think really importantly is that Taiwan has been under a great deal of pressure, military, economic, and diplomatic coercion and pressure from China since 2016. So I think the risk of military coercion has been there for years, and I think there's no expectation that it'll stop. So I think the risk that maybe there'll be additional missions or maybe slightly more provocative missions by the PLA to put pressure on Taiwan is certainly possible. But I think it's a baked-in assumption that China is going to continue to apply this kind of pressure. They're going to continue to expand the People's Liberation Army, and Taiwan is going to continue to be its core focus and its most important mission. So I don't think the Pelosi trip really changes that dynamic. It doesn't change the balance of power, and I don't think it dramatically increases the risk of a military confrontation.
Drew, thank you for that. Drew Thompson, the visiting senior research fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.